how has it come back?
And why do you think that is then? What's your reasoning behind it?
Well, I think what you mentioned earlier is quite interesting because there is a collectivist culture. So if one person does one thing against the stream of the sort of community consciousness, they get extremely ostracized.
Yeah. So do you think that? Okay. So he's confirmed what I was already thinking, which is, and that's why they have a strong culture of suicide and stuff like that. If you've shamed the family, I remember reading a story. Reading a story of a man who left his family because he was in a house, and he left in Japan, in Tokyo. He left his house because he could no longer provide for them. He thought he was useless, so he said, I'm leaving.
That happens,
Yeah, so the point is that there's a strong sense of honor, collective community honor there in Japan. I'm not saying Islam is the only solution, by the way. My thesis is as follows, is that when you have a strong individualism, okay, and you compare it to more collectivistic cultures, then the individualistic cultures are more likely to be high in crime than the collectivistic ones. That's my idea. Because if you go to a Christian community in Africa, that's why I said any country in Africa. If you go to a country which is majority Christian in Africa, but they are all, have a strong community or tribal allegiance, then it will be the tribal fathers that will come in and so on. Chief masters, whatever they call.
Do you believe that Islam is something that is applicable to any country and any culture at any time? In other words, is it something that's eternal?
Yeah.
And your justification for that?
Yeah, I believe in that. I mean, that's what the religion of Islam claims to be. But then that doesn't mean that it's rigid. It doesn't mean that it doesn't take into consideration the socio-economic or political factors. Because there is an inbuilt flexibility in the religion of Islam, such that you can have culture of, for example, if Japan became a Muslim country, like maybe Malaysia is a good example because it's the closest to it. Malaysia wasn't a Muslim country, Indonesia wasn't a Muslim country, then became. But if you compare Malaysia and Indonesia to Egypt once again, you're going to find many things in the former that you didn't find in the latter, because they have a different kind of temperament, a collective temperament, they have a different culture, and so on. So I'm not saying that Islam is going to come in and engulf everything. It comes in, yes.
Just pick what fits.
No.
Change it about a little bit and just apply.
No, it comes in and gives principles of how to live one's life. Overriding principles. God is the Most High. These are the laws. This is how you should be with your family. This is how you should be with your community. Okay, but then you as a culture, as a people, bring in your own flavor of that. So, in Malaysia, it's not going to be the same as Nigeria.
And your justification for that, do you believe like human beings are also in that sense, something that is, you can apply to them like the book would be the Quran. The book of the Quran would be in your case. That you can apply that to human nature, because also human nature is not something that is changing. It's something that you can explain from within like the context of religion.
So what did you say that again, sorry?
So I'm saying you believe that human nature is not something that changes over time either. It's something that is fixed.
Human nature is another topic. So let me answer the question. I feel like Islam has 2 or 3 things that are important and have a cross section with the psychological literature. Yeah. First of all, the idea of fitrah, which is that everyone is born with the predisposition to believe in God. All right. But there's another thing as well, which is that the Quran states that وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, and by the self and he who created it. So he inspired it by giving it propensity to do good and propensity to transgress. So the human being has propensity to do good or bad. Okay? Both of that is an integral part of the human project. God has put that in both of us. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, the Quran continues, the one who has purified himself has succeeded. وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا, and the one who corrupts himself is a failure. So you have the potential as a human being to be either or. Okay? So why they say there's a cross section of like the psychological literature is that in psychoanalytic theories you'll find that the psyche and the dark side of the psyche and all these kind of things is there. The unconscious mind, we believe in all of that. In fact, where Freud wrote a book on dreams and experimented with like the idea of the unconscious, where dreams come from, we also believe that dreams can be of the unconscious mind. That was something that was said 1,400 years ago. The aql al-batin or takhabbat al-aql, so the same thing was there. So when you find that the unconscious mind is composed of these different things, the potential to do good, the potential to do bad, some that can surface into the conscious reality and sometimes it's not. But yeah, that's where there's a cross-section, I would say, between the psychological literature and the Islamic understanding of, for example, human psychology.
Because often it's not just against Islam, but against any sort of religion, or any, let's say, dogmatic religion, let's say in that sense. The common argument is that it can't really be applied to human beings because human beings are essentially an ongoing phenomenon, right? They're like a future-orientated, and they change all the time. And you talked about the fitrah, but the opposite side would be the sort of like existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre and his ilk, who would say, actually, we're born without a blueprint, right? We are who we make ourselves to be, how we live our lives out.
I mean, I don't know if Sartre said that, or not. I haven't read that.
I think he did, yeah.
But I can remember. Descartes said the exact opposite. He said we're all born with the autograph of God, and so the idea that you're born like, because he got that from when he went through the meditations and he went through all this cogito ergo sum. I think therefore I am. He said that's the highest level. It's the thing that. But he said that is we are born with the autograph of God. I think therefore God is as well. And so the idea that we're born with that, I think is a fixed part of the human psyche. That is a fixed thing. But the other things are there as well, and it's for the human being to choose, basically. And we believe it's a voluntary agent. Human being is a volitional agent.
Oh, you do believe that?
Yeah.
Okay. You don't believe it that the human being's action is determined then?
We believe in compatibilism.
Okay. Okay. I was under the impression that, because it's a debate, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah.
Compatibilism, determinism.
Now we believe in compatibilism.
Actually, do you mind me asking you about that?
Yeah, of course.
Because I'm struggling with this concept that, God is sovereign, right? And so he knows what's going to happen in the future, right? So he has complete sovereignty over humankind. But at the same time, he's giving them free will. So it seems like from the outset that there's a contradiction here, because how can you really have free will if God has sort of written out exactly what you're going to do? And I've been studying this Catholic monk called Spanish monk in the Middle Ages, something Molinism, yeah. And
William Lane Craig is doing something on that.
Yeah, he had an interesting idea that he said God has
middle knowledge. Middle knowledge.
Yeah. So, I mean, what would be a good way of explaining the Islamic argument for that? Because it's a struggle to think, well, I'm free, but actually God has written it out.
I should start off by saying, quite frankly, that just as Christianity has divided on the issue, so has Islam. Right? If we're being completely honest, right? I take the compatibilist position, but there were more positions that are closer to crass determinism, and there were more positions that are closer to libertarian free will within the Islamic idea. Just like in secularism, there are all three views. Same thing with Islam, same thing with Christianity. You have Armenianism, you have Calvinism, and then you have Molinism, as you've mentioned, right, with Molina, and which William Lane Craig is defending the position of academically right now. The wood knowledge or the middle knowledge is actually, I was looking myself to find if there's any, are you going to go?
Put my head off.
All right.
It's nice meeting you.
You too, my friend. Yeah, see you later. Yeah? Thank you.
Don't know if you want a picture.
Yeah, let's take a picture. Well, you've got it all there, so you can. Let's take a picture. Come.
Wait. To take it from you. Hi.
Do you want him to take it for you?
Yes, please.
We'll talk about middle knowledge in a second. Yes.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Yeah. See you later. So middle knowledge. Actually, there's a view which is commensurate with it in the Islamic paradigm. And it took me a long time to find it. But there's a guy called Najmuddin al-Tufi which had pretty much the same view. But he said that God, not the same view, he had a slightly different view, which is that God holds you to account based on what knowledge you would have done if you were free. If you're independent, okay, then God holds you to account based on that knowledge. Okay? Now, that's, for me, it's a problematic view. Because on logical grounds and also on textual grounds, but I'm just letting you know that there is a kind of similar view in the Islamic view. The main opinion, the compatibilist opinion, is that there is an intersection, there is a symbiosis, there is some kind of compatibilism between godly determinism and human free will. Human being, from one perspective, is completely volitional. But from another perspective, is totally dependent. He's dependent existentially. That without God, human being would not exist.
Yeah.
Just like without the sun, this tree would not exist in front of us.
Yes.
But God has also allowed the human being to make decisions on his own behalf which don't interfere with his own sovereignty. How that takes place, the mechanisms of that, I don't know. And in fact, I believe they're unknowable. Because the Sunni position, the Sunni Islamic position is that anything relating to God's attributes is fundamentally, the howness, the mechanics of it are fundamentally unknowable.
The Sunni position.
Yeah.
Is that the same for the Sufi and the Shia as well?
Sufis are, like, for example, when we say Sufis, it's not really a creedal school of thought.
Right.
It's referring to, like, you know, yeah. So most Sufis are Sunni, or at least they would claim to be, right? They would say I am Sunni. If you meet any Sufi, they would usually say I'm Sunni, Deobandi, and whatever. Yeah. The Shiite position, Shiaism, like Tulsi and others like that, is similar to the Mu'tazili opinion, which comes closer to libertarianism, which is there's a person called Al-Qadi Abdul Jabbar, who's a Mu'tazili. He wrote a book, and in that book, he said that basically God creates what we do. God knows. Mu'tazili is a misconception. People think that the Mu'tazilis believe that God doesn't know, but he affirmed that God knows the future, but lets the human being act on his own spirit, on his own way. How that works out is problematic. That's why the other Sunnis have said no. Actually, it will threaten the sovereignty of God.
Yes.
That's the mainstream Ash'ari opinion, which is like represented by Al-Baqillani and Juwayni and Al-Ghazali.
Yeah.
And it's also the opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah and the Hanbalis. For example, Ibn Taymiyyah said it and Ibn Qayyim said that.
Yeah.
So there's a range of opinions here.
Fascinating stuff, yeah. Very fascinating. A lot to think about.
Thank you, my friend. But just to, there's a verse in the Quran which kind of, Quran says, فَلَمَّا أَزَاغُوا أَزَاغَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُم. When they deviated, God deviated their hearts. So in other words, it's like this. God is all powerful, is sovereign. He has given human beings free will. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, in his book, Shifa al-Alil, he states that it's the example of a person, it's like a slave. Okay? A slave has a slave owner, and he says to him, look, here's money, go and buy X, Y, Z. If you don't buy what I want, I'm going to punish you. And if you buy what I want, I'm going to reward you. So he gives him permission, idhn. It's in Arabic, idhn. He gives him permission to go and buy whatever he wants. He says that, who's really in charge here? God is in charge. God is in charge. In this analogy, it's like the slave and the slave owner. He says God is in charge, but he only gives human beings permission. And since that permission doesn't escape God's sovereignty, there's no contradiction here. So he's saying that, for example, that God gives human beings free will. But since that free will doesn't escape God's permission and or his sovereignty, therefore there's no contradiction between human free will and godly determinism.
Well, it limits your options though.
How so?
Well, I mean, because if God knows, then he sets some kind of parameters by virtue of knowing.
I mean, the thing is, I don't feel like knowledge itself is the problem here.
Okay.
I think if God knows that you're going to hell, and then you commit actions, his knowing doesn't mean that he's forced you to go to hell.
Yeah, we make any choice.
It doesn't mean that he forced you to go to hell.
No, but his knowledge doesn't change, right? It's not like he knows and
Yeah, I
he changes his
agree.
mind.
I understand.
So
but what I'm saying is
in that sense, you're just carrying out some kind of like biological deterministic behavior.
No, but then if we're saying that the human being has free will at the same time here, so God's knowledge doesn't inhibit the human free will. So the question would be, how does godly knowledge of the future inhibit human free will?
Well, it limits your options. It means you can only have, instead of having, I don't know, infinite options, you have like 100 options.
How?
Well, just by virtue of setting some kind of parameter around the. I mean, if you know London, for example, you know the parameters of London. You know that this is going to be outside, this is going to be inside. You have only a few routes that you can, explore. So, I mean, I guess in that sense,
the knowledge is based on the actions of the human being and the godly determinism working together.
right.
So the knowledge is not despite human free will.
Right. Okay. So it's not a negation.
Yeah.
Regardless. Okay.
What becomes difficult is how could God will it?
Yeah.
How could God create it? That's where the difficulty is. And so how can a human being be free at the same time God has willed everything? We're saying there's a mechanism at play which no one knows.
Is it?
The how question is unknowable. It's like asking the question, how does God see? How does God hear? I don't know.
You don't see any problem with that from the Islamic perspective, that you cannot know these kind of things? Because, you know, some common arguments that come from Christians towards Islam is that, you know, that there's some kind of, with all due respect, some kind of sort of anti-intellectualism when it comes to these things, whereby you just don't know, right? And that's it. Don't even explore it.
I mean, the Christian polemics on this issue, intra-Christian discussion, Calvin versus Arminius, and Molina and so on, is very similar.
It is very similar.
Right. Even let me put it this way for you. Atheists are debating it. So you have atheists who are compatibilists, like Daniel Dennett, and then you have Sam Harris, who's a determinist. Yeah. So, I mean, this discussion, by leaving Islam, let's say, someone is so worried about the Qadr question, he leaves Islam. Oh, I don't know how it works. Okay, what are you going to become? Christian. He's going to see the same discussion there. You're going to become atheist, he's going to see the same discussion there. He's going to see, so it's a difficulty with the human project. It's something that human beings have found hard to understand. How is it, on the secular paradigm, that an uninterrupted causal chain of antecedent events causes the future, causes the present, but at the same time human being has this volitional free will? That's the secular question. The religious question is, how is godly determinism and human free will commensurate with one another, or compatible with one another? And that it permeates through all three major world religions, Abrahamic religions, and all the other religions, in fact. So this question is difficult. In terms of the mechanisms of it, it's unknowable. And that's why if it wasn't unknowable, you wouldn't have, it's one of the biggest debates in philosophy, secular philosophy. It's one of the biggest debates in religion.
Huge.
If it wasn't that difficult in terms of mechanics, someone would have some kind of answer for it. But there are debates for that reason.
From the Islamic perspective, you're not saying we shouldn't explore. You're just saying even if we explore, it's just extremely hard.
I'm saying that there are some aspects of this discussion which are going to be fundamentally unknowable.
That's
the mechanistic question.
And therefore we should keep exploring, but we just won't know it. You're not
I'm saying there are some things which can be known, and some other things which cannot be known.
Right.
So the things that we say as Muslims that cannot be known is the howness. The mechanistic question, the kayf, how is it? How is godly determinism and human free will come together? We postulate that they do. In fact, I think it's almost undeniable or unfalsifiable to say that right now when you're drinking, as you're talking, as you're acting, that you think you're in charge of your own actions. I think you do. I think I do. And if we didn't think that, as John Locke said, then the criminal justice system would be because in fact I can say, well, I go to court and say I was encumbered by an antecedent causal chain of uninterrupted events. No one has ever said that in a court. You know, it's never been a defense, and for good reason. Because one of the presuppositions of justice, or justice being served in a law setting, legal setting, is that human beings are volitional, unless, of course, they are mental or insane or something like that. So that's what I'm saying. It's fundamentally impossible to deny or falsify the fact that I am saying, first person subjective, I am in charge of my actions and speech right now. At the same time, it's almost impossible to also postulate, unless you want to deny causality, that there is an antecedent, causal, and uninterrupted chain of events. So you are in. Even if we park the religious discourse to one side, you have this tension.
Yeah.
And we're saying that that's why many compatibilists say there must be this point of compatibilism. The mechanisms of what I'm saying is unknowable.
One last question.
Yes, sir.
Is it the will of God in Islam that all human beings, as much as possible, gain entry into heaven, go to heaven? Is that his will, or has he sort of, in a Calvinistic sense, more like predetermined people?
The will of God from an Islamic perspective is divided into two.
Right.
What some called al-irada al-kawniyya and al-irada al-shar'iyya. So the al-irada al-kawniyya is the cosmological will, and irada al-shar'iyya is the legalistic will. So if we're saying, is it the will of God? Then from a legalistic or Shara'i perspective, yes it is. But from a cosmological perspective, no it is not. So then how do we differentiate? We're saying that God has created volitional creatures, independent, not independent in the strictest sense of existential independence, but to make their own decision making. They have free will, yeah? God has made free willed creatures. He has given them guidelines, told them this is what we want you to do. It's a test of life. And a favorable outcome is for you to believe in God, which will satisfy your own egoistic self-inclination. From that perspective, yes, God wills that human beings follow the guidelines. And that's why in the Quran it says, مَا يَفْعَلَ اللَّهُ بِعَذَابِكُمْ إِن شَكَرْتُمْ وَآمَنْتُمْ. What would Allah do? This is a Quran verse in the Quran, Surah Nisa. What would Allah do with your punishment in shakartum wa amantum, if you're grateful and you're believers? Like what gain is there from a godly perspective from punishing you? There's no gain there. So from that perspective, yes. But from the perspective of what will be the will that is carried out, well, the will that is carried out will be the one that is in congruence with justice. It's like to say a judge. I know analogies are all problematic, and this is a problematic analogy. I'm telling you that from the beginning. But he wants to judge in favor of the defendant or somebody, he wants to judge. However, the case makes it the case that he must be prosecuted. For example, if you're a judge and your son was in front of you, court, you would want him to be innocent.
Of course, yeah.
You would want him to be innocent. But in terms of you're willing him to be innocent, if you are a judge and you have to judge against him, then you will him to be guilty, if need be. Do you see the point? So the ambiguity, we have to disambiguate this word called will. Because the will can have more than one denotation or understanding. So if we're talking about from a cosmological perspective, then no. If we're not, then yes.
Fascinating stuff.
Thank you so much, man. What was your name again? Mustafa. Oh, Mustafa. Good to meet you.
I am from Islamic background, but
Are you from Turkey?
No, I'm from Iraq.
Oh, okay. Inshallah, I come back to the dream.
Inshallah.
Take
Thinking
care.
about a lot of things.
Think about it, yeah?
اسمح لي بكلمة. I've got a question. If you've got enough energy and time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Barakallahu feek. So I was asked this question, I didn't know how to answer it. So just a clarification, inshallah, Muhammad. So it's Surah Mary 19, verse 7. I'll just say it from Sahih International. O Zachariah, indeed we give you good tidings of a boy whose name will be John, Yahya. We have not assigned to any before this name. Okay, so that's the verse. What I was asked was this. When it says never assigned before, is it full stop within like the total history of humans? Or is it just the family of Zachariah alayhi salam?
No,
because some say the Hebrew John, Yahya alayhi salam, is Yohanna, I think if I'm right. And they say, historically there were other Yohannas prior.
I'll look into tafsir just to make sure. But if Allah says, لَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ مِنْ قَبْلُ سَمِيًّا, we have not made it, it could be the case, and I'll make sure of this before, I don't want to, that Allah didn't do tasmiyah of someone like that. It might not mean the case that he was never called, there was never someone called that. So Allah, he named certain people, certain things. Himself.
Yeah.
So Allah, he called him Yahya. Yeah? So it might be the case that Allah, he never himself assigned the name.
The first time he assigned a human, that name.
He's the first time.
Direct.
But it might not be the case, and I have to double check tafsir if this is correct or not.
Sure.
It might not be the case that it was never called that in the whole of history before. But I'll double check for you.
Because I've seen some bracket saying specific to Zachariah alayhi salam's lineage. Within just the family branch.
That might be the case as well. I'll double check to see, inshallah.
Barakallahu feek.
Thank you. We've got to go get some food. Who wants to take these things?
I'll give it to Sam and Dawah and the other brothers.
You've got it, thanks man.
Sunnah.
Just going to get some.
Inshallah. Good.
Put them in the bag.
I press stop, yeah?